Some of you may be wondering what all the applause is about, but if any of you had ever struggled to latch or unlatch the old set of doors on our propagation house, you might understand. With some of our past closure systems, it was all too likely to get locked into or locked out of this essential structure. We tried gate latches, homemade wooden latches, buckets of rocks, you name it. But now, at last, a simple turn of the handle lets you open or securely close the door. Thank you for all your hard work, Max. Allow me a quick digression into the various door types we have on the farm. The Red Barn from 1949 features the old, reliable guillotine latch. Homemade, simple and strong, but darn hard to get back out if someone latches you in. When we created the washroom in the Purple Barn, we needed a simple person door latch for daily use and settled on a magnetic Manta brand. It was designed for a vinyl fence installation and required some ingenuity to use on a wood door. The washroom door swings in per most building codes, but High Tunnel 1's double doors both swing out due to interference with the interior wind bracing. They work very well until we get a very heavy snow, maybe some drifting snow, at which point they need to be shoveled out. When the two new tunnels were put up, we went with double doors that slide on the interior of the end walls to avoid that problem. We got to liking those sliding doors so much that when we constructed the tomato ripening room, we added sliders between it and the loading dock, and between the loading dock and the washroom as well. The exterior slider we installed to shut off the loading dock is almost too heavy for daily use, but it does provide some security from the elements when the west wind whips up. But let's get back to the conditions out in the field. Many of the occultation strips have been corralled nicely after their year-end walkabouts. Some of the most unruly strips have been removed entirely, and you may see some evidence of the sheet-composted tomato plants and the resultant mulch that is helping to protect our soil from the worst of the winter elements. In some cases, like this portion of last year's squash patch, there are hardy weeds continuing to grow right through January's single-digit temperatures. They may be the first to flower and set seed in the early spring, but there is still time to get the upper hand on these little rascals. In one of the beetle banks, you can see the stumps and logs that were added last year to diversify habitat choices. Each of those cracks provides multiple nesting sites, and if you've ever stumbled across a rotten log during a hike in the woods, you know what a profusion of invertebrate life they can support. A close look at the overwintering spinach shows leaves beginning to lose their vitality and slowly shrink. As they decline, the desired canopying effect on the bed surface is lost right up to the plants themselves. While their rebound in the spring should be substantial, it will take some patient hand-weeding to bring out the full potential of these two beds. Here are some shots from a few days later, when the strongest plants show how they manage to keep their leaves exposed to the light above the snow. But I know that those sneaky weeds are hunkered down just under the blanket of white, patiently waiting for the warmth to return. As we zoom past the lower wildflower meadows stubble and past the well-mulched garlic beds, it's good to remember just how much labor went into those tidy-looking rows. Garlic stays in the ground for such a long time that almost complete weed control is required to pull in a good crop. That lengthy stay also nourishes our soil fungal growth, as shown by the greatly increased amount of earthworm activity around the garlic roots at harvest time. The overwintering kale looks more than a bit sorry, with drooping and browning leaves, acting as if they're barely hanging on to life. But that thick straw mulch and kale's ancient history as a survivor plant will mean that almost all of these plants will burst back into life in the early spring. At that time they will produce some of the sweetest leaves these plants will ever produce, often followed by an ephemeral spring treat. Their flower shoots, or napini, harvested when they look like broccoli buds, can command some high prices. The single bed of rye cover crop, planted on October 21st, continues to make solid progress, even in the low levels of solar light we continue to endure during this dark time of year. But you can see that we are getting much better coverage down at the western edge of the field, which was planted just 3 weeks earlier. This is just an anecdotal snapshot from a single location in Hadley, Massachusetts, but it points out what a big difference planting dates can have on cover crop effectiveness. Once again, we zoom along the entire south border of Field 2, and I'll briefly recap some of the 2020 growing season and our progress into 2021. The asparagus was a weedy mess last spring, and a lot of volunteer and crew time went toward keeping the weeds from going to seed. The pathways need another thick cardboard and wood chip mulch to help consolidate those weed control measures. Oh, the former hemp patch. It seems to stretch on forever and represents about 1/5 of our available growing area. The good news is that it has already been laid out in the new path spacing. The weed control was decent last year, with just a few problem areas left to deal with. Okay, let's just skip the bad news. After a few open beds, we get to another peek at the overwintered spinach beds. Emperor from Johnny's on the left, and Bloomsdale from High Mowing on the right. Both varieties were planted on the same day in very early September. We are often looking for a cool, damp spell in the middle of August to direct seed spinach, but no surprise, the weather didn't cooperate this year. Continuing our quick trot up the south border, it is easy to see the remains of the winter squash beds without any of the light snow cover seen earlier. The green areas are all weedy paths of various widths in this section of the field. That green, of course, reflects continued biological activity in our soils, but attractive as those paths may look, they require constant mowing during the season and represent a substantial carbon and labor expense for Astarte farm. And even though they may look dormant here in January, they are sending out root structures to scout out new growing areas right into our production beds. Jim's vineyard plantings are ready to prune along with his apple, pear, and nut plantings. The blueberries can get pruned anytime between now and early spring, whenever the conditions aren't too raw and the snow isn't too deep to see the ground around the plants. Past the bramble fruits, which also require pruning or possibly even flail mowing, we pass the upper pollinator patch. This area has filled in nicely and matured to the point where it provides a sort of understory windbreak addition to the line of pine trees that help protect the propagation house. A quick turn around the farm compost pile, and we are back to the south wall of that vital structure. You may wonder why I spent so much time at the beginning talking about doors, but sometimes it is the little seemingly insignificant things that make a farm run smoothly. Are the hand tools organized and stored close to where they are used? Does the delivery van start reliably? Are there sufficient supplies for the task at hand? Does the door open reliably and not bang about in the wind? Okay, 2021, here we go. Hope you all will come along for the ride. Thanks for watching.